Kratom is a very interesting plant. Somewhere in the biology of the plant's will to exist, it, like all other living organisms, makes chemicals. These chemicals sometimes have function in the living organism, in the cells. Sometimes they don't. For example, there are chemicals secreted by like some frogs, some toads maybe, that protect the animal from attackers, right? They have toxins that are secreted in the skin. Sometimes chemicals may be needed by living organisms to continue to live, perhaps the foundation of the cells within the organism. And there may be byproducts of these biological processes that just so happen to have an effect on the human body. It's all a game of chance, really. An evolutionary quirk. Or sometimes, like in the case of like animals that secrete toxins for protection, it could be advantageous for the organism. In any event, when we look at nature, when we look at plants, there are lots of chemicals within them. This is imagine like going to a landfill or a dump, where everybody's throwing their trash. Most of it is trash, but if maybe you're a curious person, I imagine like a young kid, rummaging through all the trash. Maybe you'll find something golden, something maybe somebody didn't realize they were throwing out. Or maybe they did throw it out on purpose, but it had no value to that person, but now you finding it has value to you. That's kind of like how medicinal chemists look at nature. A lot of our medications come from nature, either directly, someone correct me if I'm wrong. I believe captopril, which is a medication used to treat low blood pressure, comes directly from a certain snake's venom. Which would make sense if you're a snake and you want to subdue your prey. Yeah, inject them with a chemical that lowers their blood pressure so much that they perish. But medicinal chemists will see this chemical in nature and they'll isolate it and they'll say, well, hey, maybe let's not give a human the full dose. Let's reduce the dose. The dose makes the poison. Everybody loves that phrase, right? Or in some cases, like some of our insulin products, they'll isolate. Now, in this case, it would come from a human. They'll isolate insulin in one way or another, and they'll tweak it just a little bit. They'll add a couple carbons and an oxygen here. Maybe they'll add a nitrogen there along the molecule, the naturally occurring molecule. And we can create a more beneficial molecule. Typically with some of our long-acting insulins, like Lantus, I believe, is one of these, they will make it last longer, which is good. The less injections somebody has to do per day is a good thing. So the point I'm trying to make here is nature is really the best medicinal chemist there is. It's our job to look into nature and either find an active chemical, isolate it, and maybe mess with the dose, or we can slightly change the molecule to make it something that behaves more favorably in the human body. Now, Kratom is a plant in Southeast Asia, and it has several different active ingredients. But what we have done is we've isolated what the most active of them are. There's two in particular that get the most amount of attention. And that's mitragynine, at least that's how I pronounce it, and 7-hydroxymitragynine. What these two chemicals actually do is not easy to understand. As a general description of them, they both bind to mu-opioid receptors as an agonist, which means it activates that receptor. Okay, we have lots of different chemicals already that do that. In fact, coincidentally, two that I know of occur in nature. Codeine, codeine does not, codeine is actually not active at all, by the way. Your body transforms it into morphine. And morphine is also occurs in nature. Both of these chemicals occur in the poppy plant. So when you ingest these chemicals, they also interact with the opioid receptor. The mitragynine and 7-hydroxymitragynine, they interact with the receptor in a different way. This is where things get very, very complicated, and it's to the point where it really just depends on who you ask. When they interact with the mu-opioid receptor, they do not recruit something called beta-arrestin. So like the mitragynine or 7-hydroxymitragynine binds to the opioid receptor, and then there's this, I'll say this is beta-arrestin, and then whenever like morphine attaches to the receptor, it'll bring this in, and this plays a role in one of the nasty side effects of mu-opioid activation called respiratory depression. And respiratory depression is very bad. Your breathing gets very, very shallow, and you can perish from that. This fact is something folks who, quite frankly, don't really know what they're talking about act as if it's this magical cure for pain. It is not. I think it could be, though, and I'll explain why here in a moment. Respiratory depression can happen through other mechanisms, not just beta-arrestin. Now, you would expect 7-hydroxymetragenine and metragenine to cause less of respiratory depression because it does not recruit beta-arrestin. And that is likely true, and that is very good. I love that. But people associate this difference as making it benign. That is not true. Additionally, I see folks say things like 7-hydroxymetragenine and metragenine are partial agonists at the mu-opioid receptor. That may or may not be true. This is getting into really, really advanced stuff. The experts don't really know. It is definitely possible, though. This is where my mind as a pharmacist kind of goes whenever I see something like this. Inside the Kratom plant, we have 7-hydroxymetragenine, metragenine, and then there's a couple other things. I don't even remember what they're called. There's about like 20 different molecules. Okay, now this is in the Kratom plant. When you take this naturally occurring combination, it has a different effect than if you were to isolate the two most active chemicals and take that, right? And I struggle to say this, but it likely would be safer to take the naturally occurring kratom than some of these extracts. Because I mentioned 7-hydroxymetragenine, that's like the most active. In fact, it's 13 times more potent than morphine. Inside of kratom, it's a very, very small percentage of kratom. However, that in and of itself really does not matter. I could really care less what percentage of a kratom powder is composed of 7-hydroxymetragenine. That is irrelevant. I care about the milligram amount of the 7-hydroxymetragenine within the kratom. So I don't care if it's 0.000001%. That means nothing. If it's still, 100 milligram or whatever, probably be less than that. If it's 10 milligram and 10 milligram is a dose that can be dangerous, then that makes that dangerous. These active chemicals, particularly 7-hydroxymetragenine and metragenine, as I said, they interact with the mu-opioid receptor, but they also interact with other receptors, kappa, delta, perhaps, I don't want to say anything that's incorrect, but probably some other receptors as well. And this is going to create a different effect and a different side effect profile from, our more traditional opioids, morphine, etc. What gets tricky is, as I said, kratom has all these active chemicals in it. The more active ingredients you have, the more difficult it is to create that safe and effective dose. It's like hitting a moving target. It's very, very difficult. What if you increase this one and you decrease this one? Well, there's about 20 different active chemicals here, so there's a lot to mess around with. So for me as a pharmacist, I want to isolate the best one. And I want it to be dosed properly. And even better, if we can tweak the structure a little bit to make it safer, that would be amazing. It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened. It wouldn't be. And that would be really, really cool. Also, side note, I don't fact check these ASMR videos. They're more of a, more of an interesting, relaxing experience. If I were to go through all of that, this wouldn't be fun for me and I wouldn't even do it. But I believe I saw at one point mitragynine is metabolized into 7-hydroxymitragynine by the human body, which is quite interesting. But even more interesting is that there appears to be a rate-limiting conversion. Like, if you add 10 milligram of mitragynine, not all of it would be converted into 7-OH. There's like a ceiling of that conversion, which limits the effect and limits the negative side effects as well. I believe I saw that somewhere. I'm not 100% though. So what do we make of all of this? Everything I just said there. It's very, very complicated. I would love to see, mitragynine, 7-OH, or maybe one of the other chemicals I haven't spoken about there. Modified in some way if a modification is needed. Like I mentioned earlier with, insulin, add a couple carbons here and oxygen there, nitrogen there, or whatever on the chemical itself to create a more favorable side effect profile. I think that'd be really, really cool. But it would take a lot of work. It would take a lot of studies, a lot of trial and error. But it might be able to be done, I don't know. So as it sits today, we just don't really know. We have only anecdotal, we don't have only anecdotal experience, but it's mostly folks who have their personal testimonies, saying it's good, it's bad, it saved my life, it uninstalled my brother, it's horrible, or, it's a lifesaver. That's pretty much what people make decisions based on anymore. And unfortunately, at least that I don't know of, there's no real well-controlled trials yet. So this is in the realm of mystery to me. This whole Kratom, 7-hydroxymitragynine thing. But it looks really interesting. Especially when you consider that these chemicals may not create as much respiratory depression as some of our current medications that we use for pain. I have noticed one thing though. I cannot prove this, but in a world where misinformation runs supreme, I have seen this on some of my own videos, some of my friends' videos who are, medical teachers or influencers, whatever term you want to use, there's a lot of bots. I can't prove it, but there are a lot of bots that appear to be working together to artificially change the public's perception about Kratom in a way that makes people want to try it. I think this is true. I have seen numerous, like, Danny-XYP, type usernames with no activity on their profile, all of a sudden coming out of left field with this long manifesto about how Kratom is safe and it doesn't recruit beta-arrestin, and 7-hydroxymetragynine is a small percentage of Kratom, and it saved my life, it saved my friend's life. All of this rhetoric I keep seeing over and over again. And it's shocking. Let's leave Kratom out of it for a moment. It's shocking to know what kind of power a well-orchestrated organization can have just in the comments section of online videos and posts. People are very quick to trust an anonymous user that says, I did this and this was the result. It's scary, folks. Think about elections, my goodness, the stock market. I mean, people have been manipulating the stock market on social media for quite a while. And, you can think right now of a couple really, really big examples where, there have been massive changes. So, I don't know. I think it's just really tough. Because you wanna protect the anonymity of people. It wouldn't make, I don't think it would be really that good of a thing if you had to verify yourself as a real human to interact with things. And probably people, I would assume, would figure out a workaround of that anyway for their botting schemes. But yeah, if there's anything you took away from this video, it's be skeptical. Be skeptical. Be skeptical of this video too. But yeah, I don't think Kratom, I think Kratom is a promising scaffold for something else. But as it sits right now, there's just not enough info. Mostly anecdotal. A lot of the times by bots. At least I think so. But maybe one day it'll be something else.